Hi, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of the Theater Teachers Toolkit. My name is Alex, and I am the owner and creator of Performed Solutions. My goal is to help theater educators create and produce awesome things with their students. So today, we are starting our adventure. We are starting our podcast and our YouTube series on helping theater teachers sort of navigate and create shows with their students. So if you follow me on TikTok, which you should, under the same name, Performed Solutions, you will see that I have been doing sort of a small series on shows that are popular for secondary education, popular in secondary education, middle school and high school. Of course, community theater is in that realm as well. I am a former theater teacher. I spent the last 8 years teaching high school theater in public education. I'm currently pursuing my MFA in directing. And so I sort of do that. And this sort of came about because I have this master's degree in education already, and I just realized that there was this need, this deep need for help when it comes to theater education. For some reason, and I don't know where this comes from because, it's not just in theater. I see it across the board um, in a lot of different areas. There's a lot of gatekeeping, and I don't understand that mentality. Um, Teaching is hard enough. Um, Life is hard enough. We do not need to gatekeep things. If you have found a way to make something easier for another human being, share it with the world. We're all freaking miserable right now. Like, let's just help each other out. I don't understand. So that's sort of where this idea came from is I have many years of experience being in the theater education realm and doing theater education and being, I hate being a braggart, but being rather successful in it. Um, so how can I use that and my knowledge to help others? How can I do that? And so that's where Perform Solutions sort of came from. And I hope once I graduate with my MFA, I go teach in higher education. Like my goal would be to teach future theater educators how to be successful theater educators. But, that doesn't always happen, Sometimes choir teachers are thrown into the role of theater education, science, English teachers, people from backgrounds who don't know theater, or they did theater in high school, they did theater in college, or maybe they do community theater, but that doesn't mean they know how to teach theater education. That doesn't mean they know how to navigate all the processes. And so that's where the Theater Teachers Toolkit, this podcast, and this video series is going to come in and help. All right. So I do have resources available on my Teachers Pay Teachers account, but that's not what this is about. This isn't about me selling resources to you. Those are awesome resources if you want them. Again, under the same name, Performed Solutions. You can find those on Teachers Pay Teachers. You can also find my improv book, the improv playbook, which is just a bunch of improv lessons and improv games for your students on Amazon. So today, on our flagship episode, we are going to be talking about the very first show that I talked about on my TikTok, which is You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, which wasn't the first show that I directed in the high school theater realm. But it was the first like bigger show that I did. My very first year teaching, I directed an Agatha Christie straight play, and then I was really scared of doing musicals because I had no help. I was the lone theater teacher, and the choir program wasn't very big at my school. So there wasn't really access to a choir teacher or someone who could help teach music. So that was something that I had to do by myself, right? And so I was really afraid of doing a musical. And so my first year, there was this really beautiful, beautiful new work written by a friend of mine from college that was a play that had music in it. I wouldn't consider it a musical by any means, but there were a few songs in it. And so that was the first like musical I directed. But this is the first full fledged musical that I did with students. And so it has a little special place in my heart. And when I think back on that show and the lovely students that I had, it warms my heart and it makes me really happy. So that's kind of where I began. So I didn't see a reason to go elsewhere when picking a show to talk about. For my first podcast in the Theater Teachers Toolkit, like just so excited. So Your Good Man, Charlie Brown. Now we are talking about the revised edition. The revised edition came out. I didn't actually look that up when I was doing my research, but the revised edition, that's what I thought, came out in 1999 on Broadway, with some really big um, names in it. Anthony Rapp, Kristen Chenoweth, B.D. Wong, like some really big um, musical theater names uh, in this revised edition. So the revised edition, of course, is based on the comic strip Peanuts by Charles M. Schulz. The book Music and Lyrics was written by Clark Gessner, with additional dialogue written by Michael Mayer, not Michael Meyer, because that would be a whole different musical, I think. Michael Mayer. And then the music and lyrics were written by Andrew Lippa, who, if you know anything about musical theater, or you've been in the musical theater game, he also wrote the music and lyrics for two other extremely popular shows in secondary education, and that's Addams Family and Big Fish. And both of those I will be doing a podcast on in the future because I haven't directed Addams. I was supposed to direct Big Fish, and then the pandemic came, and that didn't happen. But I adore the musical Big Fish. It's one of my absolute favorite shows, and I can see it being extremely popular in secondary education. I mean, my students were really excited to do Big Fish before it didn't get to happen because of blah blah blah. Anyways, we all know. So Your Good Man, Charlie Brown. This is a summary that I took directly from the Concord Theatricals website. It says, its happiness is great musical theater. With charm, wit, and heart, Your Good Man, Charlie Brown explores life through the eyes of Charlie Brown and his friends in the Peanuts gang. This review of songs and vignettes based on the beloved Charles Schulz comic strip is the ideal first show for those who would like to do a musical. Again, a great way to get your feet wet. See, even they know it. Even they know it. Musical numbers include My Blanket and Me, The Kite, The Baseball Game, Little Known Facts, Supper Time, and Happiness. And these songs are very catchy. I would argue to say they are earworms. I would argue to say that they are. I mean, Beethoven Day is just one of those songs that I play when I'm having a bad day and I need to get energized. Maybe if I'm feeling like my dog over there. I just need some energy in my life, right? So these songs, if you haven't listened to Your Good Man, Charlie Brown, go on over to Spotify and listen to the soundtrack. It's it's surprisingly amazing. So again, it's a combination of vignettes, so like short little scenes that don't the whole story sort of connects to a larger story, but each little vignette doesn't necessarily have to do with the overall story. They all sort of connect together to tell one big story, if that makes sense. The duration of the show is 120 minutes. However, there's a caveat to that. There has been an approved cutting for competition, so that would suggest under an hour. But if you go onto the Concord Theatricals website, there is a special note that says you are not required to perform the entire show. You may, at your option, perform your choice of scenes from the show, provided that the total running time for your performance without intermission. Now, I don't think I had an intermission for my show. Maybe I did. This was 9-ish years ago, so I don't really remember. And I did have a 1-year old at the time. Actually, she was like 8 months old, so I don't quite remember if we had an intermission. Um, but you might not have to. Under no circumstances may you add any dialogue, music, or vocal material to the show or combine versions. So they ask that you perform the revised version of the show, but you can cut scenes and vignettes that and songs to make the show more accessible. Okay. In the event that you do exercise this option, you do not need to notify us. So you don't even have to tell them if you cut them, which for me, when I was doing my very first show, my very first musical, that was huge because, like I said, I was alone. I was the set designer, the lighting designer, the music director, the choreographer, the director. I was the educator. I wore so many hats. And so being able to have this autonomy was amazing. So, for example, when I directed this show, I cut book report and I cut the kite. Book report because it is rounds of music, and I was in band all like from fourth grade through high school, so I knew how to read music, I knew how to communicate music to my students, but I wasn't confident that I could teach rounds to my students, so I cut it. Plus, I don't particularly like the song, to be honest. It's the one skip that I have. That and the other one, which is the kite. And I think I probably skip it. I skipped it then because, well, hindsight is 2020, and I'm a much better director now than I was then. And I couldn't figure out in my space how to get the kite to work. So when I directed the show, we had a stage in a library that had 8 lights that were donated to us that sometimes decided to work. Um, we had no catwalks, no grid system, no curtains, nothing, right? We just had the stage in the theater. So if I wanted wings, I had to build them. Um, or I had to sort of figure out a way to get students back to the corner of the library. It was this whole thing. But I couldn't figure out how to do the kite scene because he's supposed to be trying to get a kite to fly, and eventually he does get the kite to fly in the song. But I just couldn't figure out a way how to do that. But now if I was directing it and I had that same, I was in the same space, I probably would have just given him the like kite spool thing. I don't know. I'm not a kite flyer. I don't know things. But, I could have just given him that, and we could have, blocked it fun and in a cute way so that it communicated that he was trying to get this kite to fly, and that he eventually does. So the song is actually pretty good. I just couldn't figure out how to do it. So I cut those 2 songs, and it was fine because the show still ran, an hour and a half because the duration is 2 hours. So yeah, that's what I love about this show. This is why it's a great option. I'm gonna take a water break. The cast size for this show is 6. Um, at minimum, you need to have 6. Now, just in general, this is just a me thing. I'm a fan of gender blind casting. Now, I will say you have to keep the gender of the character because that's editing and that's copyright infringement, and you don't want to do that. But cast the best person for the role. And if you know anything about secondary education, you typically have more female presenting students than male presenting students, and that's just a fact. So, cast a female presenting person in the role of Snoopy. I did, and they were lovely. Like the best part of the show. One of my favorite students I've ever directed. And she was great. She was wonderful. Okay. So, for example, like I said, Schroeder, is a male written character. So if you cast a female presenting person in the role of Schroeder, um, they would have to go by he, him in the show because Schroeder is a male character. You cannot change the gender of the character in the show to fit the gender of the actor, um, which is fine. But again, cast the best person for the role. Who cares? All right. Also, something else I did because we had more students audition was I added a chorus. I added an ensemble of students who were in songs like Beethoven Day, My Blanket and Me, obviously the opening number, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, um, Team slash Baseball, and then Happiness. Like there are options and ways for you to add those students in, especially in the vignette scenes. There are so many options for you to have just like students in the background or whatever it is, you can have them there. Like it's just an option for you. And so I had maybe like a cast of 15 to 20, I want to say. And it was lovely. And I don't think that the students felt like they didn't get to be a part of it. Um, they really enjoyed it and it gave them wonderful opportunity. So the next thing you might be asking is, great, I know the cast size. I know the summary of the show. I kind of know what it's about. What is this going to cost me? Again, that is a very real and important thing when it comes to deciding what shows you can produce. There isn't enough money in public education. I don't know if you knew that, but I did. So if you're starting a new program, a brand new program, and you have no money, this would not be the show to do. Um, I would suggest doing a public domain show like a Shakespeare, The Importance of Being Earnest, something like that, or have a student written piece. Like, amazing, amazing work can be done in the classroom for creating shows and things like that. But this one isn't too expensive. There are some shows that are going to be rather expensive. Newsies. But I will say it did garner me the most profit. So it's hard to say. So I just went on to Concord Theatrical's website and I typed in, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. It pulled up and there's a little section that says, like, request a license, get an estimate. And so I select get an estimate. It'll ask you for your zip code, um, what your lowest ticket price is. I put 0 because, um, like, when I was teaching, every staff member got one free ticket to the show, to every show that we did. And because, students love seeing their teachers there, and we all know teachers don't get paid very much. And if you give them a free opportunity to come and support their students, like, why wouldn't you take that? So I've always put the lowest ticket as 0, but typically the lowest ticket for me when I did a musical was $10. Like actual ticket sale was $10, and that was for students and staff. And they had to show like a student ID. It could be a student from any school, as long as they were a student somewhere, they got a $10 ticket. And then staff, and then if staff brought their family or their significant other or whatever, I would give them the staff rate, and that's $10. And then the most expensive ticket, the general admission for those who are like just general people coming in, would be $12. And I worked in both of the situations that I worked in public schools. Both the school districts were Title I schools, meaning the majority of the students were on free and reduced lunch, and this wasn't an issue. Um, and if it was an issue, I would just have students come talk to me about it, and then we would find a way to get their family in to see the show. But typically $10 for student and staff, $12 for general admission. And of course, you could go lower, you could go higher. It just depends on your community, your students, things like that. Just know your community and what typically stuff gets sold for. Like, I'm pretty sure tickets to get into the football game were like $15, and people were going to the football games in like masses. So like, just weigh those options there. And so I put those into the cost generator, um, and it asks you how much you expected per performance. It depends. The last school that I worked at had an auditorium that sat 750 people. Now that was a massive auditorium. I know not everybody has that. The library stage that we had, we could typically see about 100 and 150, and so I would always expect about half per performance. If you're starting new and you have no knowledge of what it could look like, I would just do half of what the available seating is, unless you have 750, and then I put 100, because I'm not expecting more than 100 people to come per night to the show. Okay. And then it asks you how many performances. I typically did 4 performances, a Thursday night, a Friday night, a Saturday night, and a Saturday matinee. Those were the shows that I typically did. But when I did the shows in the library, there was no way to cover the windows in the library because they were like way up at the top and nobody could reach them. And so we just would do 3 shows, 3 evening performances of the show, and that was it. I mean, you could do a Sunday night if you wanted to. I know some schools do that. You could do a Wednesday night. It just depends on what you want, how many shows you want to do. I always did 4. Okay. And then the estimated cost for this show with that information was $1,100. Now that is just to put on the show. I am not sure with Concord if they charge extra for tracks. I know for a fact that MTI does. Most of the licensing companies do. So if you're not planning on having a live orchestra, which if you can work with your band and have them do a live orchestra, what a wonderful learning opportunity for all of the students involved in that. The students, when we had Pitt, loved it. Now, was it the best like symphony orchestra we could have ever had? No. Did the students have fun? Yes. Did my students performing have fun? Yes. So at the end of the day, it was awesome, and I didn't have to spend $500 to $1,000 on performance tracks. So I typically, whenever I'm looking at like cost and whether it's effective for me, is I always do 50-50. So I would assume that if I expected 100 per performance, so that's 400 total for 4 shows, 50% of the tickets would be student and staff, and 50% of the tickets would be general admission. So with the information that I gave, we're looking at about $2,000 for student and staff. That's how much money you're going to make from ticket sales, and then $2,400 from general tickets sales. So that's a total expected revenue of $4,400. Now, again, it could be more, it could be slightly less. You're just going based off of an estimate here. But to me, an $1,100 performance right contract for a possible revenue of $4,400 was worth it to me. And whenever I would look at cost versus expense, I would also look at, as long as I make back what I spent, I can keep doing shows. Now, you're not going to be able to grow and buy necessary things that you might need for your program if you're not making a little bit of profit. But at the end of the day, as long as you're recouping what you've spent, you're going to be able to keep recycling and doing shows over and over again, which to me is what it's all about. So I totally think that this show is worth it. The cost isn't that bad. I know you're seeing $1,100, and that might seem like a lot, but quite frankly, it really is not. And if that's a number that's too high, stick to a straight play. Straight plays are typically $100 per performance. Very minimal performance costs, but for a musical, $1,100 is really good. All right, so you've heard all of this and you've thought, great, this sounds awesome. I want to direct You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. Where do I start? How do I do that? Because again, we do not gatekeep here. We don't. We just don't. I'm not about that life. Yep, Ellie agrees. All right. So the very first thing you need to do is apply for the rights for the show. Okay. Concord Theatricals, like I've mentioned a few times, licenses You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. So they're the ones who are going to be able to give you the rights to perform XYZ show. Okay. Or XYZ show, perform You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. Right. So they will be able to grant you that permission. If you've never done this before, you've never requested a contract or performance rights, you're going to go to concordtheatricals.com, concordtheatricals.com, and you're going to look up the title, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and select Get License. They will ask you questions about your performance venue, what the cost of your tickets are going to be, and they will also ask you for what dates you are performing, because the problem with that is if there's rules for every show. You can't perform a show within a certain amount of time of someone else performing that show in the near vicinity, things like that. So they need to know what your show dates are and how many shows you're going to have. Okay, so here's a pro tip, because again, we do not gatekeep here. Every school district operates differently. Every school district operates differently. So if your school district operates differently than what I'm telling you, that's fine. But in the 2 school districts that I worked at and the 3 school districts my husband has worked at, you have to secure a PO or a purchase order before you can purchase anything, before you can even request the rights. Okay? So if you don't know how to do that, contact the person who's in charge in your district of financials, the person at your school, so the administrator who's in charge of clubs, or even your principal should be able to help you obtain a purchase order. Okay, so the way that I would get that purchase order and understand how much money I needed to request was I would go to MTI or Concord or Theatrical Rights Worldwide or whoever is licensing the show that I want to do, and I would get an estimate. So just the same way as you would request rights, you would go to Concord Theatrical's website, you would type in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and there's a button that says Get an Estimate. Okay, once I would get that estimate, I would double it, and that's what I would put on the PO request. Okay, so for example, if Concord quoted me $2,500, that's how much it would cost for me to obtain performance rights for XYZ show, I would request the PO for $5,000. Okay, this does not mean that I had to spend the whole $5,000, but it meant that I would not exceed that amount. Okay, but do what makes you feel comfortable. Sometimes the estimates do not include, like I said, performance tracks. If you need performance tracks, that's going to be an additional cost. And every licensing company is different, right? If you want to purchase the logo for the show, you can do that through the contract that they are going to send you. And so all of these things add up. And so you can always amend a purchase order, but that's a different story. So you want to make sure that before you request rights for whatever show it is, that you have the money in place through whatever system or process your school district requires. Okay. So you've done that. Yay! And now you have gotten the rights to the show. Congratulations. Make sure you sign the contract. Make sure you send it back as soon as possible. And make sure you get that contract paid. Because typically, they will not send you the performance materials unless you have paid a deposit at minimal or the whole balance. Okay, so they will not let you do those things if you will not be able to get your performance materials, so the librettos, the music, all of that fun stuff unless you have paid a deposit and or the full amount. Okay. So make sure you sign the contract and send that in. The next thing you're going to want to do is build your schedule. Okay. Because if you do not build your schedule first, you will not know when to hold auditions. You will not know how rehearsals are going to go. So it's important to build your schedule. Okay. So for this show, for You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, let's see. I think I rehearsed 5 nights a week for 6 weeks. It just depends. So you go with however you want. When I was directing larger musicals and I worked an hour away, I had rehearsals 3 days a week. That's it. And for musicals, I would have a 4th day of rehearsal, but my music director took that rehearsal and I didn't have to be there. But again, if you're a person of one, so that was later in my high school teaching career, I had access to a technical director and a music director, which not everybody has access to. And I definitely didn't for the first part of my career. So I understand the privilege in that. So you just have to find what works best for you. Are you going to have 2-hour rehearsals? Are you going to have 3-hour rehearsals? Are you going to rehearse Monday through Thursday? Are you going to rehearse Monday, Wednesday? Whatever it is. Whatever it is that you want to do, pick that schedule and then think to yourself, okay, I can do this in XYZ rehearsals, right? So typically for a musical, I would say 8+1 weeks. So the 1 week would be the show week. So if you open on a Thursday, you still obviously have rehearsals Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday. So I would do 8 weeks plus 1. So the 1 week again is the show week, but 8 weeks back for a musical. For a straight play, I would say 6+1. So the 1 week would be the show week and then 6 back from that. Okay. But again, you know your kids, you know your students, you know yourself. How long can you sit with this show? How long is it going to take to get this show up on its feet? What is that going to be? You need to determine that for yourself. So then you have your schedule. Great. Auditions. What are those going to look like? So for this show, for You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, I would have students prepare a 1-minute comedic monologue. I tend to ask that they pick it from a published work or a monologue book, just because you don't want to be the student's failure in audition to be because of the material was bad, right? And if it's a tried and true published work, it's going to have gone through some sort of process. And so that's what I would say. A 1-minute comedic monologue and then a 1 minute of a Broadway song in the style of the show. So this show is very upbeat, very happy. I would suggest to students to look at songs from Shrek, SpongeBob, shows kind of like that in that realm. I mean, even Addams Family and Big Fish would be good options because they're in that like up-tempo, happy, comedic realm. And that's going to be very helpful for your students. So that's what I would require for auditions, a 1-minute comedic monologue and 1 minute of a Broadway song. I would also have some sort of audition form for the students to fill out prior to audition. So typically what I would do is I would set up outside of my classroom a sign-up sheet for auditions. So the way that I would hold auditions is I would have 5 students come in a 10-minute time slot. And it would be me, my student director, and my stage manager in the room. And then I would have the assistant stage manager outside, sort of monitoring the hallway, making sure students are well behaved and respectful, and also keeping an eye out, because if students are being rude to each other, I don't know if I want them in my show. So definitely something to think about. But so then I would bring in all 5 students and they would just go They would do their pieces back to back to back to back. So when I would put the sign up sheet outside my classroom, it would be, there would be 5 slots in the 3:35 slot. Then I would go to 3:45. That would be 10 minutes next. And then sometimes I'd add in 10-minute breaks that would sort of help, give me a break to go to the bathroom, or, when I directed Newsies, I had over 100 auditions. So, like, just to get up and stretch my legs, because that was so many students to watch. Um, Things like that. And then outside of the sign up, where they would sign up for a slot, there would be a QR code for a digital form that students would access. You could also just have papers that they can grab and fill out themselves. If you want an audition packet, you can Google audition packet and a bunch will come up. If you want the one that I use that also has like procedures and acknowledgments in it, you can go to my Teachers Pay Teachers, Perform Solutions, and I'll have the link below. If you're on YouTube, the link will be there, so that you can go and purchase the audition packet that I have used for years. And then that audition packet I just put into a Google form so I could have everything in one spot, and I didn't have to keep having papers, because if you've ever been my student or you know me, I lose track of papers, and I personally need a stage manager to run my whole life, because ADHD over here, if you hand me a piece of paper, it will get lost. So I moved into this digital format, which was so much better. And I could send access to that information to like my music director if they needed that information. Or if for some reason administration was like, who auditioned? I could be like, here's the information, all digitally, just share the form, the Excel document with all the information in it. So like Google Forms is a great way to do that, but have some sort of audition packet next to the sign up sheet for the auditions, and have the students bring that audition packet, if you're doing it in paper, with them, and have your student who is sitting in the hallway ensure that they have one filled out before they enter into the audition room, or they have filled out the Google form before they enter the audition room, so that you have that information so you can contact them if you need to. So many reasons why you would need this information. That's a whole nother podcast I could talk about why the audition form is so important, especially in secondary education. And then I would have one day of auditions, do a long day of just back to back to back to back to back auditions. This show isn't dance heavy, so I wouldn't do a dance. I don't need a dance audition, but if I was doing something like Newsies or West Side Story or Chicago, right? Those shows are known to be dance heavy. I would definitely have a dance audition sign up day as well, in addition to the vocal and acting audition day. And then I would have one day of callbacks. For this show specifically, I would only call back Charlie Brown, Linus, Lucy, and Snoopy. If you have someone in mind for Schroeder and Sally, throw them into one of those other characters. You do not need to call back all 6 students. That's so much to get through, right? And you can cast Sally and Schroeder from within those 4, okay? And then from those 4, have each of them do one song from the show. So Charlie Brown, I would do The Kite, Happiness, Linus, My Blanket and Me, Lucy, let's see, what does Lucy sing? She sings The Doctor Is In, Little Known Facts, things like that, songs for Lucy. And then Snoopy, Supper Time, or Snoopy. Like, have them sing one of those songs for you. Just prepare like a small section of the song. And I never provide my students anything more than the cutting of the song that I'm having them sing, and a cutting of the scene that I'm having them to sing or perform. It is on them to prepare. So it's on them to listen to the music, because if they want the role bad enough, they will have prepared. That's just the way that it is. If you have a smaller program, you might need to do a little bit more hand holding, and that's fine. That's just not how I operate. I work in a pedagogical field. And so my goal is to prepare students for the real world. And in the real world, there's not going to be anybody holding their hands for auditions and things like this. So I give them the information. They can ask me questions before the callback if they'd like. I will give them information at the callback of like what I'm looking for, and things like that. But I won't show them how to sing the song. I won't show them how to do the scene. That's on them to prepare and be ready for that. And then, so yeah, I would have them do one song and one scene from the show for those four characters: Charlie Brown, Linus, Lucy, and Snoopy. And then finally, once you've done all that, cast your show. Yay! It's also the worst part because then you make people sad. But it is exciting that your show is cast. It's sad that you know you have upset students. But yeah, you're basically done with that part, with auditions and getting your show up onto its feet. There's just so many fun things to do with this show. If you're like, hey, I'm kind of worried about costumes, Goodwill, thrift, see what your students have in their closets. You can also purchase a bunch of the stuff online. As far as my set went, I had 6 soft flats. So they were just 8x4 flats with canvas on top of it. And we basically took a projector and we projected an image outline of each of the characters, like Charlie Brown and Snoopy and Lucy, you know, the iconic characters that we all know. And I painted the outlines black and the color around them corresponded to the color that they are. So like Charlie Brown was yellow and Snoopy's was white and Schroeder was purple, you know, things like that. So that was the set. That was my set that I had. I was fortunate enough to be able to borrow the piano um, from someone I went to college with who had done the show previously. But on Facebook, there are tons of high school theater director groups. Get in with your local chapter of the International Thespian Society and see what you can borrow. We did find a rental company who rented us the Snoopy house, but quite frankly, it was huge. It was hard to bring on stage. And my actor only really sat on it. So, like, I could have done this with a rehearsal block and it would have had the same, a black 4x4 rehearsal block, and it would have had the same effect, I think. Um, you could do projections if you don't want to do any soft or hard goods for it. There are just so many options on how to do this show incredibly inexpensively, so you're keeping your overhead low so that your revenue will be greater and grander. As far as publicity goes, I always created my own posters. If you go into Canva and you're an educator, you can get Canva Pro for free, which is wonderful. And I would just Google poster designs and I would come up with something from those. Like, I wouldn't copy any of them, but I'd be like, oh, I like this element. Oh, I like this element. How can I put it together to create a poster? I know some theater teachers put their students in costumes on the front of the poster, and that's great. Um, when I worked at the school that had a theater in the library, I simply just printed the posters out on printer paper. That was it. It cost me nothing. The same with the programs. I just printed them out on printer paper. But I started moving away from programs after COVID-19. I just did QR codes, and that was excellent. It saved so much paper, and it was such a relief from the cost. Um, it was so good. And you can go to playbuilder.com and you can build a digital playbill and just have the PDF, have them access. You can pay to get the PDF if you want to print it, or they can just get access to it digitally for free. So it looks like a real playbill from Broadway, but it's online and it's free. So again, go to playbuilder.com and that's a great resource for you to utilize. Um, yeah, I think we went through a lot. We went through a lot. Now, if you want to know how to block this show, um, that could be a whole nother podcast. And in fact, I do offer one-on-one. So if you need help blocking the show, um, I can help you with that. But really, my best advice is to visualize how each scene you want it to look. Go online to YouTube, watch how other people have done it. Don't take it exactly, because that's stealing proprietary information, but get some ideas. There's nothing wrong with doing a lot or a little of research before you do something. And especially if you're unfamiliar, like there are tons of resources out there for free on Google to help you. Um, but as always, my name is Alex, and I'm the owner and creator of Perform Solutions. And my goal is to help theater educators create and produce awesome things with their students. And I'm so glad you all went with me on this podcasting journey today of my very first podcast on You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. And I am just so very excited that you all are here. I believe I'm going to be doing this weekly. So next week we will be doing another show. What will that be? Who knows? And as always, follow me on Instagram at Performed Solutions, at Performed underscore Solutions, and then TikTok as well, so you can get some more tips and tricks. And if you do want access to some of the resources that I sell on Teachers Pay Teachers, again, Performed Solutions is my store name, and I'll link all of those things in the comments if you're joining us on YouTube. I'm not sure if I can do that in podcast form, but we're going to figure it out. As always, I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us.